Number 1. Andrew Golobic. Andrew Golobic worked as an ICE deportation officer out of the Blue Ash, Ohio field office. For more than a decade, from 2006 until 2020, he was trusted with enormous power. His job placed him in direct contact with immigrants facing detention, deportation, and fear of losing everything they had built in the United States. Instead of using that authority to enforce the law fairly, Golobic used it to exploit vulnerable women. Federal investigators later revealed that Golobic committed serious crimes while working as an ICE officer, including sex trafficking, civil rights violations, witness tampering, and destruction of evidence. His case became one of the most disturbing examples of how unchecked authority can be abused behind closed doors. Golobic's position gave him control over people who had very little power. Many of the women he targeted were undocumented immigrants. They feared detention, deportation, and separation from their families. Golobic understood that fear, and he used it as leverage. According to court records, Golobic pressured women into sexual acts by implying that their immigration status depended on their cooperation. He made them believe that refusing him could result in arrest or removal from the country. For victims who already lived in constant anxiety, the threat did not need to be spoken clearly. The badge alone was enough. This was not a one-time incident. Prosecutors said Golobic's conduct happened repeatedly over time. He used his official role to gain access, trust, and control. He crossed the line between enforcement and exploitation again and again. What made Golobic especially dangerous was how normal he appeared on the surface. He was not a low-level employee passing through briefly. He spent 14 years inside the system. He knew procedures, he knew how cases were documented, and he knew how to hide misconduct. When suspicions began to surface, Golobic did not stop. Instead, he escalated. Investigators said Golobic attempted to interfere with witnesses who could expose him. He contacted individuals involved in the investigation and tried to influence what they said. In some cases, he encouraged silence. In others, he tried to shape their stories. He also destroyed evidence. Federal prosecutors later detailed how Golobic took steps to remove or conceal information that could be used against him. This included deleting communications and interfering with records connected to his misconduct. These actions were not impulsive. They were deliberate efforts to protect himself. The charges against Golobic painted a clear picture. He did not just commit crimes. He abused his position to make those crimes possible and then tried to erase proof when he thought he might be caught. The investigation into Golobic's behavior revealed a pattern of civil rights violations. The women he targeted were not free to say no in any meaningful way. Their immigration status, their safety, and their families were all at risk. By exploiting that imbalance of power, Golobic stripped them of their basic rights. This case raised serious questions about oversight inside immigration enforcement. Golobic worked for IC during a time when immigration enforcement carried enormous authority and discretion. Officers like him had the power to detain people, recommend deportation, and influence the future of entire families. For victims, reporting abuse by an ICE officer felt impossible. Who would believe them? And even if they were believed, what would happen to their immigration cases? That fear kept many silent. Prosecutors later emphasized that Golobic relied on that silence. He counted on victims being too afraid to come forward. He believed his badge would protect him. It didn't. When federal authorities finally moved against Golobic, the case sent shockwaves through the community. An ICE deportation officer, sworn to uphold the law, had instead become a predator hiding behind federal authority. The charges against him were serious and wide-ranging: sex trafficking, civil rights violations, witness tampering, destruction of evidence. Each charge reflected a different way Golobic tried to control others and escape accountability. The case also exposed a larger problem. Golobic did not operate in a vacuum. He worked inside a system where power over vulnerable people was routine and oversight was limited. His crimes forced a closer look at how easily authority can be abused when transparency is lacking. For the victims, justice came late, but it came. Their stories helped dismantle the image Golobic had built around himself. The badge that once shielded him became evidence of his guilt. The authority he used to intimidate others became the reason his crimes carried such weight in court. Andrew Golobic's career ended in disgrace. The same position that once gave him control over others became the reason his actions were scrutinized so closely. His name is now tied not to law enforcement, but to exploitation and abuse. His case stands as a warning. When law enforcement officers abuse their power, the harm goes far beyond individual victims. It damages trust in the entire system, it makes people afraid to seek help, and it leaves lasting scars on communities already living in fear. Andrew Golobic was trusted to enforce immigration law. Instead, he used fear, authority, and silence as tools for personal gain. And in the end, that abuse of power is what defined his legacy. Number 2. Samuel Saxon. Samuel Saxon was not a low-level employee. He was a senior supervisor inside Immigration and Customs Enforcement. As an assistant field office director with ICE enforcement and removal operations in Cincinnati, Ohio, Saxon held authority over officers, investigations, and operations. His position placed him near the top of the local command structure. With that authority came trust, and Samuel Saxon abused it. For years, Saxon presented himself as a disciplined federal supervisor. To the public, he was a law enforcement executive. Inside his private life, prosecutors would later show a very different person, one who used intimidation, violence, and deception to control others. Saxon's crimes did not begin inside an office or during an arrest. They happened behind closed doors. According to court records, Saxon was involved in repeated acts of domestic violence. These were not arguments that got out of hand. Prosecutors described a pattern of physical abuse that included strangulation, assault, and threats. Strangulation, in particular, is considered one of the most dangerous forms of domestic violence because it dramatically increases the risk of death. Despite the seriousness of these acts, Saxon remained in his supervisory role. His position inside ICE made reporting him difficult. Victims feared retaliation. Saxon controlled schedules, assignments, and careers. He also understood how investigations worked. He knew what to say, what to deny, and how to delay. That knowledge became part of the abuse. When allegations surfaced, Saxon did not accept responsibility. Instead, he lied to federal investigators. He minimized events. He denied key details. He attempted to reshape the narrative in a way that protected his career and reputation. This is where the case crossed a critical line. Domestic violence is already a serious crime. But lying to federal investigators, especially as a senior law enforcement official, turns personal violence into institutional corruption. Saxon wasn't just hiding abuse, he was obstructing accountability. Prosecutors later emphasized that Saxon's rank made his actions even more serious. As a supervisor, he was responsible for enforcing the law and setting an example. Instead, he violated the law and tried to manipulate the system designed to hold people accountable. The charges against Saxon included felonious assault, strangulation, domestic violence, and making false statements to federal investigators. Each charge represented a different layer of abuse: physical, psychological, and institutional. This case raised disturbing questions. How does a senior federal official accused of violent crimes remain in power for so long? How many warning signs were ignored? And how many people felt unable to speak because of his position? Investigators later made it clear that Saxon relied on fear. Fear inside the home, fear inside the workplace, fear of consequences if anyone challenged him. He believed his badge and title would protect him. They didn't. As the case moved forward, Saxon's image as a respected ICE supervisor collapsed. The authority he once used to command others became evidence of how deeply he had betrayed his role. What made this case especially damaging was the message it sent to victims. When someone at the top of a law enforcement agency commits violence, it discourages reporting. It tells victims that power can outweigh truth. Saxon's actions reinforced that fear. Prosecutors argued that holding Saxon accountable was necessary not just for the victims, but for the integrity of federal law enforcement. Supervisors cannot be allowed to operate under a different set of rules. When they do, trust in the system breaks down. Saxon's downfall also highlighted a broader issue within enforcement agencies: internal accountability. Officers and supervisors are trained to investigate others, but when misconduct happens inside their own ranks, the response is often slower and more cautious. In Saxon's case, that delay allowed harm to continue. Ultimately, the legal process caught up with him. The same system he once navigated with confidence became the system that exposed him. His lies were uncovered. His authority no longer protected him. Samuel Saxon's career ended not with retirement or promotion, but with criminal charges that permanently defined his legacy. Today, his name is no longer associated with leadership or enforcement. It is associated with abuse of power. His case serves as a reminder that authority does not equal character, titles do not prevent violence, and badges do not excuse lies. When someone entrusted with enforcing the law uses their position to harm others and then lies to cover it up, the damage spreads far beyond one household. It erodes trust in the entire institution. Samuel Saxon was supposed to be an example. Instead, he became a warning. Number 3. Jonathan E. Ross. On a freezing January night in Minneapolis, a federal immigration operation ended in sudden gunfire, leaving a woman dead and a city demanding answers. The officer who pulled the trigger was Jonathan E. Ross, a veteran ICE Special Response Team agent. The woman he killed was Renee Nicole Good, a 37-year-old U.S. citizen and mother who was not the target of the operation. The operation took place on January 7, 2026, in South Minneapolis. ICE agents were carrying out enforcement actions tied to immigration arrests, the kind that often happen quickly and without much warning. Officers arrived in unmarked vehicles, some wearing tactical gear rather than traditional police uniforms. Residents later said the scene felt confusing and chaotic, with people unsure who the armed men approaching actually were. Renee Good was inside her vehicle when agents moved in. Federal authorities say officers were attempting to make contact when her car began to move. According to ICE, the vehicle drove forward while agents were nearby, and they believed their lives were in danger. In that moment, Jonathan Ross fired multiple shots into the car. Renee Good was hit and died at the scene. ICE officials quickly defended the agents' actions, describing the shooting as a response to an imminent threat. They emphasized that vehicles can be deadly weapons and that agents are trained to use lethal force if they believe they are about to be struck. They also pointed to Ross's prior experience, noting that he had previously been injured in another incident involving a vehicle during an arrest attempt. But almost immediately, a different story began to circulate. Family members said Renee was not violent, was not armed, and was not trying to harm anyone. Witnesses in the neighborhood questioned whether her car was actually moving fast enough to pose a real danger. Some claimed the vehicle appeared boxed in, with limited space to escape. Others said the situation escalated too quickly, leaving Renee no real chance to understand what was happening or comply with commands. There was no publicly released body camera footage. ICE does not routinely make such video public, and that lack of visual evidence only fueled suspicion and anger. Within hours, news of the shooting spread across Minneapolis. Protesters gathered near the scene and outside government buildings, holding signs and chanting Renee Good's name. For many, the case reopened old wounds about federal law enforcement operating in local neighborhoods, particularly in communities of color, with little transparency or accountability. Local officials demanded answers. Civil rights groups called the shooting unnecessary and reckless. Questions mounted about why heavily armed federal agents were operating in residential areas and why a U.S. citizen ended up dead during an immigration action she was not even involved in. The federal government announced that the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security would review the use of force. Jonathan Ross was not publicly named by DHS, citing officer safety, but his identity emerged through media reporting and court records. As of now, no criminal charges have been filed, and the investigation remains ongoing. For Renee Good's family, the explanations offered so far are not enough. They say a mother lost her life in seconds, without warning, without a weapon, and without a chance to survive an encounter she never expected. For the city of Minneapolis, the shooting has become another symbol of tension between federal power and civilian life, and another test of whether accountability will follow when deadly force is used. As the investigation continues, one fact remains unchanged. Renee Nicole Good went out that night alive, and she never came home. Number 4. Guillermo Diaz-Torres. The arrest happened quietly, away from any immigration operation or federal raid, but it still raised serious questions about conduct and accountability. Guillermo Diaz-Torres, an ICE agent, was taken into custody in the Chicago suburbs after local police stopped him while he was off duty. According to CBS News, officers observed behavior consistent with impaired driving. After pulling the vehicle over, police said Diaz-Torres showed signs of intoxication. Field sobriety tests were conducted, and investigators concluded there was probable cause to arrest him for driving under the influence. Diaz-Torres was handcuffed and transported by local law enforcement, not federal agents. At the time of the arrest, he was not performing any ICE duties and was driving his personal vehicle. Police records indicate the charge was handled the same way as any civilian DUI arrest, with no special exemptions based on his federal employment. The incident quickly drew attention once his identity became known. ICE agents are sworn federal officers expected to enforce the law, and critics pointed out the sharp contrast between that responsibility and the alleged conduct that night. Civil rights advocates argued that cases like this undermine public trust, especially in communities where ICE already faces intense scrutiny. ICE acknowledged the arrest and confirmed that the matter was referred to internal review channels. Federal agencies typically place officers under administrative scrutiny when they are charged with criminal offenses, even if the incident occurs off-duty. Disciplinary outcomes can range from suspension to termination, depending on the court result and internal findings. As of the latest reporting, Diaz-Torres remains subject to criminal proceedings in local court. DUI charges can carry penalties, including fines, license suspension, mandatory education programs, and possible jail time, depending on blood alcohol levels and prior history. ICE has not publicly disclosed whether he was placed on administrative leave while the case moves forward. For many observers, the case became another example cited in broader debates about law enforcement accountability. While the incident did not involve violence or use of force, it highlighted how off-duty conduct by federal agents can still have serious legal and professional consequences. The criminal case remains separate from any internal ICE discipline. Until a court ruling is reached, Diaz-Torres is presumed innocent under the law. Still, the arrest stands as a reminder that federal authority does not shield officers from local criminal charges, and that public scrutiny often follows when those tasked with enforcing the law are accused of breaking it themselves. Number 5. John Jacob Olivas. John Jacob Olivas worked as a special agent with Homeland Security Investigations in California. From 2007 to 2015, he carried a federal badge that gave him access, authority, and trust. His job placed him in sensitive investigations involving immigration, human trafficking, and organized crime. People were expected to cooperate with him. Many had no choice. Behind that badge, Olivas committed serious crimes. Federal prosecutors later charged Olivas with sexual assault, rape, and civil rights violations. His case exposed how someone entrusted with enforcing the law can instead become a predator when power goes unchecked. Olivas did not abuse strangers at random. According to court records, he targeted women who were vulnerable. Some feared law enforcement, others feared deportation or legal trouble. Olivas understood that fear, and he used it to his advantage. As a federal agent, Olivas controlled access. He decided who would be questioned, detained, or reported. Victims later said that he used that authority to coerce sexual acts. The pressure was not always spoken directly. The badge, the gun, and the implied power were enough. This was not a misunderstanding. It was not poor judgment. Prosecutors described a pattern of deliberate abuse that stretched over time. Olivas presented himself as professional and confident. He knew procedures, he knew how investigations worked, and he knew how difficult it would be for victims to come forward. Reporting a federal agent meant risking retaliation, disbelief, or immigration consequences. For many victims, silence felt safer. When allegations finally surfaced, Olivas denied wrongdoing. He claimed that any contact was consensual. But investigators found evidence that told a different story. Witness testimony, digital records, and timelines showed clear abuse of authority. Prosecutors focused heavily on civil rights violations. This was not only about sexual assault, it was about stripping people of their rights through intimidation and misuse of government power. Olivas did not act as a private citizen. He acted as a federal agent when committing these crimes. That distinction mattered. The case highlighted how dangerous it can be when law enforcement officers cross ethical and legal boundaries. Victims were not free to refuse Olivas in a meaningful way. The power imbalance was overwhelming. His position turned consent into coercion. As the investigation deepened, more details emerged about how Olivas operated. He carefully chose situations where oversight was limited. He avoided leaving obvious records. He relied on victims' fear to keep them silent. This strategy worked for years, but eventually the system caught up to him. When federal prosecutors brought charges, the case sent shockwaves through the agency. A Homeland Security agent accused of rape and civil rights violations struck at the core of public trust. Olivas had been sworn to protect people, not exploit them. The legal process made one thing clear. Olivas did not accidentally misuse his authority. He used it intentionally. His crimes forced difficult questions. How many warning signs were missed? How many victims stayed silent because they believed no one would listen? And how many opportunities existed to stop him earlier? Cases like Olivas's often reveal weaknesses in oversight. Federal agents operate with significant independence. That independence is necessary for investigations, but it also creates risk when someone abuses it. Prosecutors emphasized that holding Olivas accountable was about more than punishment. It was about restoring trust. When law enforcement officers violate civil rights, the damage extends beyond individual victims. Entire communities lose faith in the system. For victims, coming forward required courage. Speaking against a federal agent meant reliving trauma and risking public exposure. Their testimony became the foundation of the case. John Jacob Olivas' career ended in disgrace. The badge that once protected him became evidence against him. The authority he relied on became proof of coercion. His name is now tied not to investigations or public safety, but to abuse and betrayal. This case serves as a reminder that power without accountability creates danger. Law enforcement authority is meant to protect the public, especially the vulnerable. When that authority is used to harm, the consequences must be severe. John Jacob Olivas did not fail because of pressure or mistakes. He failed because he chose to exploit power for personal gain. And when the truth came out, the system he once controlled was the same system that brought him down.